What's up everybody, it is Dan Cam, Thank you so much for tuning into another video. Today we're looking at the Lian Li B4 case. So this is a micro ATX chassis that's available in white and in black, and you can also get it with this wood front panel. And there also is an optional aero deck, which we'll talk about in just a bit. But this is a really interesting looking case, nice and small footprint. If I back up, you can get an idea for just how small it is. It's 21.3 liters and it's pretty much entirely mesh. We've got mesh on the side panel, on the top, on the front, and behind these wood slats on the back panel. And then taking a look at the rear, we've got a spot for a 120 millimeter fan. Our motherboard sits right there. We've got our PCIe slot covers. Then we also have a rotating power outlet. So we have an internal cable that'll route to the power supply, but we have this rotatable power outlet. And the reason why this is, you can position this case in two different ways. So you can have it horizontal just how it is now, or if we look at the rear, we've got 4 feet down here. So you can actually flip it so this is the bottom of the case. So if your cable was plugged in like this, there wouldn't be enough room to fit it. So what you can do is you can actually push this in and your cable actually routes this way. So you have enough room to mount it upright. So let me go ahead and switch this upright and we can take a look at how it looks. Okay, so now the top of the case is actually the front, and we can see we've got our I/O up here, which I didn't cover earlier, but we've got USB-C, combo audio jack, or power button, and 2 USB type A. And the bottom of the case is now the rear. So I think in this vertical position, you save a ton of room because it's usually not so much the height that you're worried about, but it's how big the footprint is. So this is going to save you a lot of room if you don't have that much space on your desk or wherever you may be placing it. So there's 2 different ways to run it. So that's extremely cool. But I think one of the best parts about this is the aero deck I was talking about earlier. So this is now the rear of the case, and we've got this aero deck, which I'll go ahead and grab. So this is an additional $30, but you can see we've got that nice wood slat in front, and then we've got a window on the side, and you can actually mount fans in here as well. So what you do is you remove these 4 feet. There's just Phillips head screws in each of these feet. So you remove those 4 feet, and then you remove the dust filter, and then you can go ahead and slide this on. So let me go ahead and do a little montage of me doing that, and we can see how that looks. Okay, so we've got the aero deck installed, and I think it actually looks really good like this. And I think this is the build that I'm gonna end up doing, because for some reason, stand-up cases like this, more vertical builds, I've just been really gravitating towards, and just small form factor builds in general. But the aero deck looks really good. And now what was the bottom of the case is now the front. So it gets a little bit confusing. And one thing is our I/O is now in the back, but what you can actually do is there's 4 screws that hold the I/O in place, and then you can relocate it to the top of the aero deck. You can see we just have some blank cutouts right here, so we can swap over our I/O and now have it on the front up top. And then taking a look at the side, we do have these windows on each side of the aero deck, so you can actually install 3 fans inside of here, and it should look really good, especially if you're using like RGB fans or like infinity mirror fans. So I think this is a really cool look, and I'm actually really excited to build in this one. So is there anything with the exterior that I haven't gone over yet? I think I've covered just about everything. So let's go ahead and take off all these panels and now take a look at the inside. All right, so we've got all of the panels removed. And guys, this is a very versatile case. There is a lot of different builds you can do in here. And starting off, we've got 2 pre-installed 120 millimeter fans, and these are slim fans. And what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna flip this one to be intake, because I'm actually gonna go the air-cooled route, but as is, there's 2 exhausts. So if you're running an AIO, it's probably best just to leave them like this. But if you're going air cooler, I would switch this one to intake. So we've got 2 pre-installed 120 millimeter slim fans. You can fit a 120 millimeter fan in the front, but you can't use a fan if you're using an ATX PSU. I believe it's only with SFX. So I might have to correct myself while I'm editing, but you can fit a 120 millimeter, and they're saying only a slim fan will work, but I watched a couple videos and people were able to install 25 millimeter thick fans in the front. So you can fit ATX and SFX PSUs, and it's going to go ahead and sit in the front. Then we've also got this extension cable, which my camera doesn't want to focus on. This will plug into the PSU, and then your power supply cable will plug into that rotatable outlet back here. Oops, and I just moved the whole case. So it's got an internal cable for the PSU. We've got this side bracket right here that can fit 3 120 millimeter fans or up to a 360 millimeter radiator. And you can also remove this as well. And I believe for air coolers, you can fit 163 millimeters for the max height, but with this removed, you can actually fit, I believe, 168. And I'll go ahead and correct that in post when I'm editing if that is not correct. So let's see what else it is. You can fit micro ATX motherboards, but you cannot fit back connect boards in here. You can fit 3 120 millimeter fans down at the bottom, but if you're using the Aero deck, you actually mount the fans to the Aero deck. So with bottom fans in here, it does limit you on the thickness of your GPU, but if you're using the Aero deck and the fans are installed in there, you have much more room for a really beefy GPU. And then also with length, you have pretty much this entire section to fit a GPU as well. And then taking a look at the rear, so we've got a spot for a 120 millimeter fan, but if you're running it air cooled, you can actually flip this. So you flip this, and then this section that's over here actually sits about right here, and that's going to be for air cooled setups. So let's see, what else do we got up here? We already talked about the rotating power outlet up here. So I'm probably going to keep it in this direction because I'm going to end up building in it vertically. So I'll leave it like this, and our power supply cable plugs into here, and I'll probably just route it out this way somehow. So let's see, we covered the fans on the top. We do have a sag bracket that's pre-installed, so it looks like it's going to be for pretty big GPUs, but yes, it does swivel this way as well. So you can actually swivel it so you can fit a bit of a smaller card. So most 3 fan cards should fit with this sag bracket, and there's just 2 screws to adjust it up and down, and then you can go ahead and swivel that part. And then here's the bracket for an SFX PSU. So we'll go ahead and take that out, and I'm going to be using SFX for this build. It looks like we have access to the back of the motherboard. We've got the Lian Li and Dan Cases logo back here. So let's see, what else am I missing? I think there's a lot of stuff I'm gonna have to go over later because there's so many different options for this build. And I think I'm just gonna leave a lot of specs down in the description and the pinned comments, so it's just kind of easier to see the overall scope of what you can do with this case because it's pretty extensive. The Lian Li and Dan Cases A3, which this one kind of supersedes, was very similar. A lot of different builds can be done in that. And this one, I feel like they upped the versatility. So there's a lot of different things we can do with this build. So I'm really excited to see how the build ends up turning out. And the cool thing is I'm gonna build in it just normally, but we're gonna have it vertical, and then pretty easily I can switch it back to horizontal if I want. I think the only thing I'll have to do is swap the fans from the Aero deck to this bracket down at the bottom. So a lot of different options for this one. So I say we just get into the build process and then cover everything, you know, a bit later once it's all done and see how it looks. All right, so let's go ahead and let's get into it. All right guys, so the build is done and I think it looks really good. And there's a few things I changed from the montage to the finished product. The first one is down at the bottom here, which is technically the rear when it's set horizontally, but vertically, this is actually the bottom fan now. I was using the same fan that I'm using in front, which is the SL Infinity Wireless from Lian Li. But with that RGB, it kind of only lit up this side of the case and it didn't really look that good. So I ended up just going with a plain white non-RGB fan, and I'll throw up some B-roll of how that looks. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. But I personally think it looks much better with the inside having no RGB, how it is now. And then if we take a look at the front, we've got those 3 infinity mirror fans. So we basically only have RGB on the front of the case. And then if we look at the side, you can see we've got our infinity mirrors, but at a normal viewing angle, this is how it looks, and I think it looks really good. So I ended up swapping out that bottom fan for a non-RGB one. And the next one is, since I'm using the Aero deck, I could have relocated the IO to the top, but instead I'm just using this little dummy piece. So I was gonna relocate it here, but then I was thinking about it. I have to use this wireless controller for the front fan. So that controls RGB and fan speed. So originally, well, normally I plug this into the motherboard, but there was not enough room to fit it. Because if you think about it, the motherboard, all the IO ports are facing downward. So this controller would not fit. So I ended up leaving the IO here, and I have the controller plugged into here. And then I ended up using the dummy one's right here, and I could have ran this controller internally. You can see on this side right here, if it's going to focus, I don't know if it's going to, but there's a way to wire it internally to a USB 2.0 header, but I ended up just plugging into the back. I'm on a pretty big time crunch with this build. I've got to move on to my next project. So I ended up just doing it like this, which looks a little bit goofy. You can kind of see the controller sticking out, but like I said, at a normal viewing angle, you can't really see it. It's not too bad. So that's one thing you may want to think about is if you are going to run a wireless controller like this, I'd probably run it internally because it's not going to fit on the bottom. If you're running it horizontally, then you're probably okay, but just something to look out for. But overall, I think this build looks really good. I'm not too sure about the top wood panel now. Honestly, if I were to run this vertically, I would get the all mesh version. So I would have this be white mesh, and then I would get the Aero deck, so the only wood is on the front. Because I think that, honestly, it doesn't look too bad, but let me know what you guys think down in the comments. I just think that looks maybe a little bit weird. Maybe not. Let me know what you guys think. But overall, this build looks really good, and I'm actually really happy with this. Take a look at this side. Not too much to see over here. There's actually nothing to see over here. We can see a little bit of our power supply and the cables. And then this side, we can't really see anything with the covers on. So let's go ahead and take off all the panels and then take a look at the inside. Okay, so for the build, we've got a 9800X3D CPU. We're running an Asus TUF 5070 Ti, and this is the BTF variant, but this case does not support back connect, so I'm just using it regularly. You can see I've got a connection plugged in here, but this is BTF, so you actually could do BTF if you have that type of motherboard. We've got the Sudoku SK700V air cooler, one of my favorites, and it does have a digital screen, but it doesn't really look good when it's on, when the mesh is there. You can't read it at all, and obviously it's sideways as well, and you can't flip the orientation. So I ended up just leaving the screen off. We've got the Lian Li SL Infinity Wireless fans in front. We're using the 2 slim fans that come with the case. And then I've got a random NZXT fan down here that's non-RGB, and it's literally the only one I had that's non-RGB. So I ended up just using this fan, and it does match really well, but you can see there's a little NZXT logo, which looks a little out of place, but we've kind of got a whole pile of different components in here. We've got a Gigabyte Aorus B850M motherboard. We've got a Lian Li SPO 850P. So this is an SFX PSU, really nice, got really nice cables as well. And then let's see, what else am I missing? I think we got just about everything. RAM, it does have Team Group T-Create RAM, 32 gigabytes, RIP RAM prices right now. And then we've got a 2 terabyte Gen 5 MP700 Elite from Corsair, and also RIP SSD prices right now, because I think that thing right now is like $700, which is absolutely ridiculous and makes me question my sanity when making videos on PC builds. But I love doing it, so I'm going to continue to do it, and I love computer hardware, so I really want to keep computer hardware alive. So there's the finished build. We've got all of our cable management pretty much right here. We have a few dangling cables at the bottom, which I probably should clean up. It's not really close, but you can see it's kind of close to the GPU fans, but not really hitting right now. And then all of my front panel cable connectors are all tied up right here. So it's a really clean looking build. I really like how this turned out. And we can take a look at this side over here. You can see the back of our motherboard. We can see the power supply, a little bit of the GPU over here as well. This is for the sag bracket. You can adjust it up and down, or I guess left and right in this orientation. So let's go ahead and talk about the build experience. So honestly, I feel like this case is a bit more difficult, and I would probably give it a difficulty rating of about 6 or 7 out of 10. So if this is gonna be your first case ever, I think you're gonna have a little bit of a tough time getting through everything. But I would just make sure, if you do plan on building in this case, just take your time and just kind of route each cable one at a time, because it is a bit tricky to get everything to fit in there. You can see all of my PSU cables kind of had to be bunched up right here so they don't interfere with the GPU, and you can see my GPU cable comes right here. So I've got all those right there, and then I had to kind of squish all of the front panel cables over here as well. But the really difficult part about this is, it's probably because I used this air cooler, but the EPS cable, which is the CPU cables, those were extremely difficult to plug in once I had the motherboard in. I literally could not get that 8-pin to fit into the motherboard back there. So what I recommend and what I did is I actually loosened these two back fans right here. So there's screws over here, and I ended up just loosening those, and I kind of just shifted the fans out of the way, and then I was able to plug the EPS cable in, and then I reinstalled the fans. But overall, not a horrible process, but you really have to think how you're routing things, and there's a lot of things that get in the way. And then especially with the aero deck, like this made it easy because the fans actually bolt to the aero deck. But if you're not using the aero deck and you're running it, let's say, even vertically, but if you're running it horizontal, you're gonna have a really tight gap here between the GPU and the bottom fans, because without the aero deck, you mount the fans to the inside of the case right here, and there is barely enough room to fit 25mm thick fans. So you'd either have to go with a GPU that isn't as thick, or you'd have to get really creative with your cable management, because there is hardly any room right here. But the aero deck, you can see I've probably got about 30mm of clearance between the GPU and the front fans. So a few things to think about. Overall, it's not too bad. I've obviously built a lot of PCs, and I think this took me about 1 hour and 45 minutes with filming and all the good stuff and swapping this over. So not too bad, but if it's your first case, take your time. I would thoroughly read the case manual, because there's a lot of good information in there as well about the best way to go at it. So just take your time. But overall, I do like this case a lot. Temperatures are actually really good. This 9800X3D benchmarked at, I think, at around 84C with OCCT. And if you've never used OCCT, it is a very brutal benchmarking tool, which will absolutely rock your CPU. So with Cinebench, I think it was at around 78, and then OCCT was 84, 85. So still way under thermal throttle, great temperatures. And the GPU, this GPU runs really cool. I think we saw a max temperature of 72 during my benchmark. So really good temps. Airflow seems pretty good. And speaking of airflow, we've got the front as intake. Then obviously the GPU pushes air this way. We've got one intake fan up here. So this fan right here is intake, and then this fan right here is exhaust. So this intake fan is feeding into the air cooler. We go out the air cooler, and we have an exhaust fan right here, and then we have an exhaust fan right here, and then there's a gap down here so air can escape out of the system. So this one is exhaust, this one is exhaust, intake, and then these three intake as well. And I decided not to run a fan right here, because with my cables right here, it would have made it really tricky to get a fan in here, and I kind of prioritized cable management over adding one additional fan right here. And even with this fan, I don't know how efficient it would be because the power supply, excuse me, the GPU is literally right next to it. And looking at this, that's barely a 25 millimeter gap. So I ended up leaving this fan out, and then we've got that wood panel over it, so you wouldn't be able to see it anyway. So I didn't compare temperatures with this top fan compared to without it, but I doubt it would make much of a difference. And then the PSU fan is facing upward, and then we've got these vents right here, which should give it all the fresh air it needs to not overheat and run properly. So what else am I missing? There was a lot with this build, and there was also a lot of stuff I didn't film, and I really apologize for that, especially a lot of the cable management. It was really tricky, and it was just really hard to get a good angle to film everything, so I ended up not filming everything. But I discussed it earlier, like that EPS cable, I was fighting that for quite a bit, and what I filmed just didn't look good. I was pretty much blocking the camera the entire time, and it was really hard to show the cable management. But here's a good look at everything I did, all the PSU cables, and then up there is all the front panel cables kind of tucked back there. So kind of a pain, but not too bad at all. But let me know what you guys think of the build down in the comments. Like the video if you enjoyed it, share it with a friend. Subscribe if you enjoy my content. Sorry if this video is a little bit rushed, guys. Like I said, I was on a huge time constraint with this one. I've got to move on to the next project almost immediately, and I actually have to disassemble a little bit of this for my next project. There's a few things I need from this build because there are 2 RAM sticks I have in there are the only white RAM I have. So I've got a white build coming up, and I'm gonna have to use those sticks. So I'm gonna have to disassemble it soon. So the video is kind of rushed, so I apologize for that. But let me know what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching the video, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace.